They were raised by a shepherd.
When they grew up, they decided to found a city on the 7 hills. They disagreed about which hill to build on. The disagreement became violent. Romulus killed Remus and built his city on the Palatine Hill. He named it after himself, Roma. He became its first king.
The date Romans gave for this founding was 753 BC. Modern archaeology suggests settlement.
Tullus Hostilius, who destroyed Rome's rival Latin city Alba Longa and absorbed its population. For the first 2.5 centuries of its existence, Rome was ruled by kings.
Ancus Marcius, who expanded Rome to the sea, founding the port of Ostia.
And Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud Strid, whose arrogance and whose son's crime ended the monarchy forever. The result was real. In 509 BC, the Romans expelled their king and decided they would never have another one. The Romans were so determined never to be ruled by a single man again that they built a system specifically designed to prevent it. The Roman Republic, born from the expulsion of the kings in 509 BC, was one of the most remarkable political experiments in the ancient world. A senate of aristocratic elders, advising, deliberating, approving decisions. Instead of one king, 2 consuls, elected annually, each with the power to veto the other. An assembly of citizens, voting on laws, electing magistrates. A system of checks and balances so elaborate that making any single person too powerful was genuinely difficult.
It was not a democracy. Slaves had no rights, women had no vote, and the aristocratic class held enormous structural advantages. That idea, however imperfectly realized, would echo through history for 2,500 years. Rome's republican, but it was something genuinely new. A republic, res publica, the public thing, the idea that the early republic was not powerful. It was a city-state fighting for survival among dozens of other city-states and the Etruscans to the north, the Samnites to the south, the Greek colonies along Italy's coastline, the Latin cities surrounding Rome itself.
The early republic fought constantly, not for empire, for survival. A Celtic people from northern Europe, the Gauls, swept south through Italy and defeated a Roman army at the Battle of the Allia.
According to tradition, a small group of Roman soldiers held the Capitoline Hill, where the city's citadel farm, refusing to surrender.
They marched into Rome. The city was abandoned. The population fled. The Gauls looted and burned much of the city. Sacred geese kept at the temple of Juno, sensing the approaching Gauls, woke the defenders with their honking. The Romans held it. The Gauls eventually withdrew, possibly bribed, possibly because of disease. Over the following 2 centuries, the Roman Republic did something remarkable. It conquered the entire Italian peninsula.
But through a sophisticated combination of warfare and alliance that was uniquely Roman.
Not simply through military force, though the Roman army was becoming increasingly formidable.
Race. When Rome defeated a city or people, it did not simply subjugate them. It offered them a relationship.
By absorbing defeated enemies rather than simply exploiting them, Rome continuously enlarged its military manpower base. Every conquest created new soldiers for the next conquest.
Defeated peoples became Roman allies causate, required to provide soldiers for Roman armies but allowed to maintain their own governance and culture.
By 272 BC, when the last Greek city in southern Italy fell to Rome, the entire peninsula was under Roman control. A population of perhaps 3 million people was now available to Rome as soldiers, taxpayers, and producers. As Rome consolidated control of Italy, it encountered a power that would test it more severely than anything it had yet faced. The great North African city-state, located in modern Tunisia, controlled the Western Mediterranean through its powerful navy and extensive trading network.
And its interests in Sicily directly conflicted with Rome's expanding ambitions.
Carthage controlled Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and large parts of Spain. It was wealthy beyond anything Rome had yet encountered. The result was 3 Punic Wars, the most existential conflicts Rome ever fought. The First Punic War, Rome, which had no significant naval tradition, built a fleet almost from scratch and fought Carthage at sea. Eventually it won, forcing Carthage to give up Sicily and pay enormous reparations. Rome had proven something extraordinary. It could learn, it could adapt, it could absorb catastrophic losses and keep fighting. It lost fleet after fleet to storms and inexperience. It kept building more. The Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, son of a general who had fought Rome in Sicily, decided that the way to defeat Rome. The Second Punic War, which began in 218 BC, brought Rome closer to destruction than it would ever come again until its actual fall centuries later. The crossing killed half his army. He arrived in Italy with perhaps 26,000 men, exhausted, frostbitten, reduced.
He would attack it on land, in Italy. He assembled an army in Spain. He marched it across southern Gaul.
And then he proceeded to destroy every Roman army sent against him. At the Trebia River.
At Lake Trasimene.
And most catastrophically at Cannae in 216 BC. At Cannae, Hannibal destroyed a Roman...
The allies of southern Italy began defecting to Hannibal. Rome seemed finished. Using a tactical encirclement so perfectly executed that military academies still study it today. Rome lost perhaps... After Cannae, Hannibal sent a delegation to Rome offering peace terms. The Roman Senate refused to receive them. They would not negotiate. They would not acknowledge that Rome could lose. They adopted the strategy of the general Fabius Maximus, avoiding pitched battle with Hannibal while harassing his supply lines and waiting for him to weaken. And while Hannibal was contained in Italy, never quite strong enough to take Rome itself, Rome was taking the war to Carthage. A young general named Publius Cornelius Scipio took the fight to Spain, destroying Carthaginian power there. Then he did what nobody had done before. He invaded North Africa, directly, threatening Carthage itself.
After the Punic Wars, Roman expansion accelerated with a speed that surprised even the Romans.
Hannibal was recalled from Italy to defend his home city. The 2 greatest generals of the ancient world met at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC.
After the Punic Wars, Roman expansion accelerated with a speed that surprised even the Romans.
Macedonia fell after 3 Macedonian wars, the final one ending in 168 BC when the Macedonian king Perseus was defeated at the Battle of Pydna.
The Seleucid Empire was pushed out of Greece and most of Asia Minor.
When the Greek city of Corinth was destroyed by Roman forces in 146 BC, the same year Carthage was The Greek cities, the cultural heartland of the ancient world, home of philosophy, mathematics, theater, and science, became Roman provinces.
There was only one power now: Rome.
The Mediterranean Sea, which the Greeks had called their pond, became Roman, Mare Nostrum, our sea. Conquest changed Rome in ways it was not prepared for. The wealth flowing in from conquered territories enriched the Roman aristocracy beyond anything previously imaginable. Those citizen farmers, unable to compete with slave-worked aristocratic estates, drifted to the cities, particularly to Rome. They bought up agricultural land across Italy, worked by enslaved people captured in conquest rather than by the free Roman citizens. 2 brothers tried to fix it. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, aristocrats who championed land reform, proposed.
The Senate, dominated by those same wealthy Romans, was not interested in reform.
Where they became the urban poor, something, the proletariat crociate, dependent on cheap grain distributions and political handouts. Tiberius Gracchus was beaten to death by senators using broken chairs in 133 BC.
His brother Gaius was killed in political violence in 121 BC. Political murder had entered Roman public life.
As the class of small landowners shrank, so did the pool of eligible soldiers.
The land problem had a military consequence that would prove fatal to the Republic. The traditional Roman army was drawn. He equipped them from public funds. He made the army professional, soldiers who served for pay, not civic duty. The general Gaius Marius solved the recruitment problem in 107 BC with a reform that changed everything. He opened the professional soldiers whose land and livelihood came from their general's patronage were loyal to their general, not to Rome, not to the Senate, not to abstract republican institutions. The reform worked militarily. But it had a political consequence Marius may not have fully anticipated. When Marius died and his rival Sulla marched his army on Rome in 88 BC, the first time a Roman...
Because Sulla fed them, paid them, led them. Rome meant nothing to them compared to their general. The crisis of the late Republic produced several extraordinary figures. The Republic had created the instrument of its own destruction. The personal army, loyal to a charismatic general, Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, who died attempting to match his partner's military glory in a disastrous campaign against Parthia. Its institutions had been corrupted, its traditions violated, its legitimacy destroyed by generations of political violence and military intervention. And Julius Caesar, the most gifted of them all. Caesar understood something his rivals did not fully grasp. The Republic was already dead. When the Senate ordered him to disband his army, he knew what would follow. Political persecution. Possible execution. Caesar spent 8 years in Gaul, conquering what is now France, Belgium, and parts of Germany. He defeated Pompey. He defeated the remaining senatorial forces in Africa and Spain. He made himself dictator. He crossed the Rubicon in January 49 BC. Civil War.
Caesar's assassination did not restore the Republic. It triggered another round of civil wars.
Caesar's lieutenant Mark Antony. Caesar's adopted heir Octavian. The Republican assassins Brutus and Cassius. They fought each other across the Mediterranean world for 13 years.
Brutus and Cassius were defeated and killed at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC.
At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Octavian's fleet defeated Antony and Cleopatra. Antony and Octavian divided the Roman world between them, until Antony's alliance with the Egyptian queen Cleopatra ended. So he called himself not king, not dictator, princeps, first citizen. He understood something Caesar had not. Romans could accept one-man rule, but they could not accept the word for it.
Both Antony and Cleopatra killed themselves. Octavian returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the Roman world.
The period from Augustus's victory in 31 BC to the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD.
It was the longest period of relative peace and prosperity the Mediterranean world had ever experienced.
The borders held. The legions kept the peace on the frontiers.
Inside the empire, from Britain to Mesopotamia, trade flowed. Albans. His successors continued building. The Colosseum, begun under Vespasian and completed under Titus in 80 AD. Augustus himself transformed Rome physically. He famously said he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble.
The aqueducts that supplied Rome's million-person population with fresh water were engineering achievements that would not be matched until the 19th century.
The Pantheon, rebuilt under Hadrian, remains the best preserved ancient building in the world.
This was Rome at its most magnificent. And already the seeds of what would destroy it were being planted.
Rome had become enormous. But an empire this large had a problem no Roman victory could permanently solve. The empire could conquer territory faster than it could afford to defend it. Maintaining the empire required a constant flow of taxation from provinces that were thousands of miles away from Rome. The peace had created prosperity, but prosperity depended on an enormous system of taxation, administration, and military protection. Beyond the borders were peoples who had no interest in becoming Roman foemen, and who were constantly learning from the empire they watched.
The empire increasingly depended on strong emperors and competent generals to hold its enormous machinery together. Rome had reached a paradox. The larger it became, the more difficult it was to control.
Rome was still powerful beyond anything the ancient world had ever seen. But beneath the marble, for generations Rome had enjoyed stability under strong emperors. Then, in the 3rd century, the system began to break apart. Rome faced a new and increasingly dangerous enemy in the east, the Sasanian Persian Empire. In the north, Germanic peoples were pressing against the empire's borders with increasing force.
Rome now had to fight major wars on multiple frontiers at the same time. The new Persian kingdom was organized, ambitious, and powerful enough to challenge Roman control of the eastern provinces. The emperor could no longer simply rely on the empire's enormous resources. He had to decide where those resources were needed most.
War was becoming more expensive. The frontiers demanded more soldiers. The soldiers demanded more money, and the money was becoming harder to find. War was becoming more expensive. The frontiers demanded more soldiers. The soldiers demanded more money, and the money was becoming harder to find.
The empire's economic foundations were beginning to strain under the cost of constant warfare.
Rome had survived Hannibal. It had survived civil war. It had survived emperors who murdered their own families. The soldiers who protected the empire were increasingly deciding who ruled it. A general with enough troops could be declared emperor by his own soldiers. The crisis was no longer simply about enemies outside Rome. The empire's greatest danger was now inside its own army.
And once one army had chosen its emperor, another army could choose a different one. And once one army had chosen its emperor, another army could choose a different one.
The Senate still existed, the imperial court still existed, the laws still existed, but real power increasingly belonged to whoever controlled the legions.
Every civil war damaged the economy. Armies had to be paid, provinces had to be supplied, cities had to be defended.
The empire was beginning to experience a terrifying cycle. Military revolt, civil war, a new emperor, another revolt,
and every soldier fighting another Roman soldier was a soldier not protecting the frontier.
Rome had created an empire that depended on its army. Now the army was becoming the force that could make and destroy emperors.
Between 235 and 284 AD, the Roman Empire came within inches of permanent collapse.
26 men were recognized as emperor during this period, and most of them lasted less than a year.
The pattern was grimly mechanical. A frontier general would be acclaimed emperor by his troops, then march on Rome and take power. Then another frontier general's troops would declare their own man emperor. Civil war would follow. While Rome tore itself apart internally, its enemies took full advantage. Germanic peoples pushed through the borders repeatedly. In the east, the Sasanian Persian Empire launched devastating invasions against Rome's territories. The economy collapsed. The currency was debased to almost nothing.
and plague killed millions.
The empire briefly split into 3 separate states. It should have been the end. It wasn't, because of one man. In 260 AD, the Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persian king Shapur I. A Roman emperor had been taken prisoner. He reorganized almost everything: the government, the army, the provinces, and the way the empire was ruled. He even attempted to control inflation by reforming the currency and fixing prices across the empire.
The army was reorganized into stronger border forces and mobile troops, capable of responding rapidly to invasions.
Diocletian also persecuted Christians, believing their refusal to participate in traditional Roman religious rituals threatened the unity of the empire. When Theodosius died in 395 AD and left the empire to his 2 sons, the division became permanent. Constantine won the civil wars, converted to Christianity, and founded Constantinople. He did not simply save Rome, he transformed it.
The eastern half was rich, strategically positioned, and protected by Constantinople's formidable walls.
The western half was poorer, faced longer borders, and possessed an increasingly fragile economy. Peoples pressing against Rome's frontiers were not simply raiders. Many were peoples in motion, pushed westward by the arrival of the Huns.
In 376 AD, the Visigoths crossed the Danube as refugees. Roman officials treated them so badly that the refugees eventually rebelled.
Rome could not simply drive them out. Instead, it negotiated, allowing the Visigoths to settle inside the empire as a semi-autonomous people. It solved an immediate crisis, but it also revealed something Rome could barely admit. The barbarians were inside.
At Adrianople in 378 AD, the Visigoths destroyed the Eastern Roman army and killed the Emperor Valens. The Visigoth king Alaric had spent years negotiating with the Western Roman government.
Alaric marched on Rome.
He besieged the city twice, withdrawing when Rome agreed to pay him.
The third time, Alaric did not withdraw. They took gold, silver, jewels, and silk, but they did not destroy Rome's great monuments or massacre its population indiscriminately. On August 24, 410 AD, the gates of Rome opened, and the Visigoths entered.
Rome, the eternal city that had conquered the Mediterranean world, had fallen to barbarians for the first time in nearly 800 years.
After the sack of 410 AD, the Western Empire's decline accelerated.
The Vandals crossed into North Africa in 429 AD and eventually seized Carthage in 439.
The loss of Carthage cut off vital grain supplies and tax revenues that the Western Empire desperately needed. In 451 AD, Attila the Hun invaded Gaul with an army of terrifying size. The Western Empire had become a rump state, with emperors increasingly controlled by barbarian generals. The following year he invaded Italy, devastating cities before turning back before Rome.
9 emperors ruled during the final 21 years, and most were killed by the very forces that had placed them in power. The institution of the Western Emperor had become almost meaningless, a title with little army, little treasury, and little territory left behind it. The boy's name contained a terrible irony: Romulus, the legendary founder of Rome, and Augustulus, little Augustus.
In 475 AD, a Roman general named Orestes overthrew the reigning emperor and placed his teenage son on the throne.
Orestes refused to give his barbarian troops what they demanded, in seek, a share of Italy's land.
Odoacer marched to Ravenna, where the teenage emperor was waiting. Then Odoacer gathered the imperial regalia and sent it to Constantinople, to the Eastern Emperor Zeno. Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus. He did not kill him. The boy was simply sent into comfortable exile. Odoacer's forces defeated Orestes, killing the Roman general and marching toward Ravenna. September 4, 476 AD. The Western Roman Empire was over. Under Justinian in the 6th century, the Eastern Empire attempted to restore the unified Roman world.
But Rome did not end in 476 AD. The Eastern Roman Empire continued for another 977 years.
Its scholars preserved the works of ancient Greece and Rome, copying manuscripts and keeping the intellectual tradition alive.
Roman legal scholars codified Roman law into the Corpus Juris Civilis, a legal tradition that would influence Europe and much of the modern world.
His armies reconquered North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain.
The attempt ultimately proved too expensive and difficult to hold, but Constantinople remained the greatest city in the Christian world for centuries. In 1453, Ottoman cannons finally breached the walls, using a technology that had not existed when those defenses were built. The last Eastern Roman Emperor, Constantine VII, died fighting in the streets of Constantinople. The Roman Empire, in its final Eastern form, was truly over.
Rome fell. But what Rome built proved almost indestructible.
Latin also became the language of the Catholic Church, preserving Roman intellectual traditions through the medieval world.
Latin did not die with Rome. It evolved into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Roman law survived the empire itself and became one of the foundations of modern legal systems. The aqueducts supplied enormous cities with water through engineering that remained astonishing long after the empire disappeared. The Julian calendar that Caesar reformed remained the standard calendar of the Western world for centuries. Rome left behind more than buildings. It left ideas about law, citizenship, government, and the state that continued to shape political thought. Rome disappeared as a political empire, but its roads, laws, languages, architecture. Historians have argued for centuries about why Rome fell. The honest answer is that no single explanation is enough. Historians have argued for centuries about why Rome fell. The honest answer is that no single explanation is enough.
The currency was repeatedly debased, purchasing power collapsed, and the financial foundations of the empire weakened.
Plague killed millions, reducing the agricultural workforce, the military pool, and the population that supported the entire imperial system.
When emperors could be assassinated and replaced within months, political legitimacy itself began to collapse. The army increasingly depended on barbarian soldiers whose loyalties could be more personal than institutional.
But when enough links in the chain broke, the system could no longer recover. The military needed money. Money required taxes. Taxes required a functioning economy. The economy required security. Security required the military. The barbarians themselves were often being displaced by the Huns, pushing enormous populations toward borders Rome could no longer adequately defend. Climate shifts and failing harvests added another layer of pressure, driving food prices upward and making survival more difficult.
Let us take the full measure of Rome. It began as a village of shepherds on 7 hills above a river crossing. Rome preserved and transmitted the intellectual heritage of ancient Greece: philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and literature. Rome built an empire that united tens of millions of people across 3 continents under shared institutions, law, and administration.
It became a republic that developed concepts of governance, rule of law, and citizenship that would echo through history. Latin survived Rome itself, evolving into languages spoken by hundreds of millions of people today.
Roman legal concepts still influence courts and legal systems across much of the modern world.
Its roads, aqueducts, harbors, and bridges continued serving communities long after Roman political power disappeared. The Church inherited Roman administrative structures, Roman geography, and Roman traditions, with Rome itself remaining at its center. Rome's greatest achievement was not that it lasted forever, It was that so much of it survived after Rome itself was gone.
7 hills above a river crossing. That is where it began.
And yet the Tiber still flows past those same 7 hills.
The Western Empire ended with a teenager handing over a crown and disappearing into a quiet life in Campania.
It's 1,000 years later, after conquest, republic, empire, civil war, plague, invasion, and transformation, the Pantheon still stands, its dome continuing to inspire architects nearly 2,000 years later.
The Colosseum still stands, battered and stripped of its marble, but standing.
Roman law still governs. Latin languages are still spoken by hundreds of millions. The Roman legacy remains woven into the modern world. The word civilization itself comes from the Latin civitas, the city. Rome's word, Rome's gift, still here. 2,000 years after Augustus, 1,500 years after the last Western emperor, Rome is still here.